All right. So this happens spring break weekend, right? We get less people. That's all right. We are going to go ahead and start on your time. So turn this on. There's someone else trying to hear the door. So we'll wait for them. So tonight, last week we had this really good discussion about the infinity and eternity of God. And there are a lot of good questions, and I felt like there were probably more that we could have asked, but I was trying to cover that and make sure we got done in time. So tonight I kind of like to break it into two parts. The first part, we'll just review where we've been the last 3 weeks, and then we'll talk about if there's any questions or anything you want to discuss or give me pushback on. I can handle that. And then the second part, we'll talk about the love of God. And it's a wonderful transition because the first 3 weeks we've been talking about several related concepts, right? And if you read books about morning, Morris and Pam. What's that? Okay.
I just woke up.
So theologians, they love their big words. So they like to think about the attributes of God kind of in two ways. And the non-communicable, hello Jackie.
Hi.
And I need a different color. Let's see. Screening gonna work? Oh, yay. And the communicable. And what they mean is there are some attributes of God that we can and should have, even though we won't have it nearly like God. For example, God's righteous. Are we supposed to be righteous? Right. And of course, God is good. God is loving. God is wise. And these are all things that when we are in a relationship with God, we can be also, right? But there are other attributes, and that's what we've been focusing on so far. We're going to kind of move from there to here, that are exclusive to God, and they'll never be part of our existence because they're part of the essence of God as creator. So we're never going to be that. We're never going to be equal with God in that way. And so what's some of those we mentioned the last few weeks? Help me out here.
Aseity.
All right, aseity. You get the first brownie points of the night. And you get even more if you can explain that to anybody who hasn't been here so far.
I have no idea what that is.
Aseity is God stands alone. He needs nothing. He's sufficient in and of himself.
Exactly. Yeah.
He exists in and of himself.
Man, you're good.
If you ever need a son.
Yeah, there we go. That's exactly what it means, by himself. So he has no needs outside of himself. He is his own cause for essence, and he has life in himself, unlike everything else. Hi, Becky.
Sorry.
Hi, Lynette.
That's
That's all right. There's a couple of notes there,
Okay, thank you.
or you can sit with Kathy if you want.
I'll sit in the corner.
Do you have both the kids with you, both the girls? Or
I do,
kids?
yeah. I have not left Everly family before, so.
Oh, big day.
Yeah, I'm like, you have no one else. Here you go, let's try it out.
All right, so what are some of the other things we talked about that kind of go along with the satiety?
Transcendence.
All right, exactly. Transcendence, and we try to use an analogy here to get this across. If this is something I have made, the difference here, of course, is that I use pre-existing materials from Hobby Lobby, and God did not use pre-existing materials from Hobby Lobby. He created the material itself. So obviously, the analogy doesn't go all the way, but I made this according to my purpose. It wasn't here before. And the point is that I transcend that, right? So the creation everything from supernovas to snails. This exists in a fundamentally different way than God. He exists without any of that, but it cannot exist without him. So he is necessary, and everything else is contingent. And there's a religious word for that, right? We talked about this last time, which would be holiness. Holiness at its heart means that God is above and beyond this physical universe existence. He exists apart from that. So those things we're not going to ever have. So there's a non-cubic. What else? We talked about, we talked about God's eternity. And that he is timeless. We talked about his omnipresence. And we talked about his infinity. Infinity meaning he goes beyond limits, because limits, just like time and just like space, are part of this created world. It's not part of his essence. So that's kind of where we've been. What are some questions or thoughts? Like I said, I felt like last week there were probably a few questions that we didn't get to when we talked about God's infinity and omnipresence. Hi, guys. How are you? Good. There's the notes there. Hello, Matthew. You get the front row.
We can keep an eye on you.
Is there an extra set of notes around someplace?
No, we only need one set.
We have, I printed enough, I think. All right, so that's where we've been at. We talked a little bit about how those all work together, but thoughts, questions? Let's take a few minutes and then we'll shift gears.
Eternity and infinity.
Yeah. What about it?
Is eternity strictly limited to time? Where infinity is space and how would that
Power.
be different than omnipresent?
Well, I take infinity to be more of a general term,
Okay.
saying that God does not have any limits because he's the one who made all the physical laws and properties of the universe. So there are no limits that we can conceive of, at least, for God. And then if you apply that to the issue of time, we said, if this is the arrow of time, God is beyond that. So he's infinite in the sense that he's not bound to this. Hello.
Everyone hope to pass.
So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
And in the same way, to say that he's omnipresent means that he does not have a location in space, but there's also not an extension in space. So I extend 6 foot 1 inches in space this way and like 24 inches around the way, something like that. And parallel that with eternity, to say that God is eternal, he doesn't have a location in time, and he doesn't have an extension, so there's not a duration. Including that it goes beyond he existed, with time forever. No, he created time with this universe. And that's what we talked about last week. So, other thoughts, questions?
Holiness and transcendence. I never thought of holiness that way.
Yeah.
And we don't use it that way, I don't think.
No, we don't. And really, it was, I think R.C. Sproul, he wrote a book called The Holiness of God, and he talked about this a lot. So have you read that book? It's a great book, Holiness of God by R.C. Sproul. But that's kind of the idea, and that's why you have the kind of, we talked about 3 different ways of, or 3 different kinds of holiness. God is holy in his essence. He goes all beyond the limits of this universe. He transcends it. And then things can be holy because they're for God's purpose. So you have holy shovels in the temple, and then you have holiness as a morality. So
Yes.
again, aligned with his purpose. So, I liken it to think of that kind of holiness. It's kind of like the surface of the Pacific Ocean. That's what the holiness that we come in contact with is usually that moral kind, and that's how it's often expressed. But the depth of that goes far deeper. The depth of that is a one piece with it, but it's far beyond in a sense. That's the way I think of it anyway.
So the command to be holy, for I am holy, would deal strictly with the moral. So
Yes. Other thoughts, questions? Those that came in a little bit late, we've talked about the non-communicable attributes, and we're gonna start talking now about the communicable. That means the ones that God can not so much communicate, but make us like Him in those areas. We're not gonna be like God in these areas necessarily, but, so that's where we're gonna make the shift here in a minute. Becky has questions.
No.
No?
Becky said,
Do you remember the very first day we talked about there's a Trinity, and we have this absolute distinction between God and the universe. And even though technically we can't speak of before, we kind of have to because it's the best language we have. So before God created the universe, or God Himself apart from the universe, we talked about what was here on this side of this creator-created divide. The side of absolute being versus contingent becoming, as it were. And it's not light, right? It's not time, it's not space. What's the one thing that Scripture says existed before creation began?
love.
Love. Do you remember where it's found, Liz?
John 17.
Yep. Actually, we'll look there in a few minutes. And Jesus says, I want them to see my glory, the glory you gave me, because you loved me before the world began. And then right after that, he talks about that love extending to us. Ephesians 1, we looked at that as well. You were predestined in love before the creation of the world. So it's not only this, this is amazing. Unlike Judaism or Islam, they can't say that God in His essence is love, only in His relationship to the universe He made, because they don't believe in a Trinity. There's no one to love, right? But we understand that there is this inner Trinitarian love that's more foundational. Love is more foundational than the universe itself. Before He brought forth one particle of matter, there was already love existing. And if He had never brought forth anything in His creation, love, perfect, infinite, would still be there. That's a wondrous and comforting thought, isn't it? So that's where we're going to go. Any other questions before we go there, though? You guys are too easy on me. There were a lot of questions last week.
I think I have trouble, I struggle with the timelessness of things. Because I'm sitting here knowing that He's timeless, putting everything in time. You know,
Yeah.
That's not, I don't even know how to think any other way.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't. Because for us, we inhabit a world where one thing happens after another. So causation flows one way only. But when we remember that, it seems like the Bible doesn't teach that. It says from everlasting to everlasting, before God created the mountains and the hills, He is God. And Augustine and Anselm, great fathers of the church, said, this is our God outside of time. So it's a stretch for us. One of the analogies we used was, you've got a two-dimensional world here. So if this is the entire universe, it's two-dimensional here. And they could not imagine how things work in a three-dimensional universe. In the same way, I think we can't really understand because we have no rational experience of what timelessness would be like. But it makes sense that it's so. One of the other analogies we used was all that is here in our life and all of history is like the pages of a book. And where's God? Well, he's outside of it because he is the author of it, the one who oversees it. So that includes time itself. He's not in the timeline of the book, as it were. So sometimes analogies can help us. Does that help at all?
But that one kind of breaks down, right?
Well, they all
That's
do
on every
eventually.
page
Right.
of my story.
So if I'm writing a book, and especially if one's very dear to my heart, I'm going to be on every page of it. But not as a character on the timeline of the book necessarily. I could choose to write myself in, but
Is it,
you're not buying it.
it would be more like, and I just hesitate to even say this, but it would be more like me choosing to write God into the story, right?
I'm not sure what you mean.
I've focused my life on him, I've focused my decisions on him. So he's in that fabric.
Yeah. Well, there is a sense when we're writing our own story too, but in a deeper sense, our story is being written for us.
Okay.
And there's some way, obviously, that we have a real choice in what that looks like.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. But that's what I'm trying to get across. So, someone said, why do we not see God why do we not see God or hear God? And the answer was, well, you're not going to see the author of the play while you're watching the play, unless he or she chooses to get on the stage for some reason. So,
Don't you find you have to pay attention?
mhm.
One time it wasn't really an experiment, but someone said, write down the things that you really, really want, the things that you wish God would work on, blah, blah, blah. I wrote it all down, put it in my Bible. I don't know, 5 years later, I opened it up and he filled every single one.
Interesting.
And had I not wrote it down, I probably would not have paid attention.
Right.
So,
And that's part of our goal here, is to help us think through what probably will go beyond our understanding of it, but even just exercising our mind gives us a hope, a bigger picture of God. I hope.
Yeah, it does me.
Good.
It gives me how huge, how beyond my understanding really is. And if his basis is love, and I trust in that, then that's pretty powerful. No matter what comes in life, I know this is not outside his control.
Yeah.
And your analogy of saying, okay, we're on page 500 and something in the book, and we don't like the way the story's going. We need to realize that the end is still being written,
Yeah.
and have faith in that love that the end will end well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, most all the stories I've read that I love anyway, there's conflict, there's trouble, and which are part of the story, things are not what they should be.
I just had a tiny
Yeah.
little breakthrough of peace about even the concept of eternity. Eternity just sounds like a really, really long time, and I can't even.
Better bring a
imagine.
magazine.
Yeah,
Far side.
but it's not gonna feel like that.
No, we won't.
And it occurred to me, it's gonna be the first time we actually get to experience or lose the sense of time just, flying by. And the older I get, the more desperate I feel about that reality. But that's gonna be gone. We will just simply be.
Yeah.
And that just kind of cut through what has felt like a little bit of worry about
Good.
really long time.
Yeah, that's good. I don't have any desire to sit around in a cloud not doing anything for the rest of eternity, but that's not, I think, in line with how God has created us as humans. We want to do things. And that's a good thing, that's a gift of God, so. Thank you for that. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
When I was a little girl, I used to lay in my bed at night and think about God. And I would think, God always was and always will be. That's what, you were taught. And I would try to take that back in my mind. I mean, I was little.
Yeah.
I tried to take it back and go back and back and off. And I would get so utterly frightened because I really think that was the first time I ever experienced the fear of the Lord. Because he was so, not me.
Yeah.
And I didn't know, I kind of hesitated bringing this up because I know you can't really talk about it. But it was something. I think that's what that lady over here was saying. It's like you just can't comprehend
Yeah.
that he always was, that there was an existence before creation where they existed together in perfect love.
Yeah.
And why would they create this mess?
Out of love.
Out of love, yeah.
I have an aquarium in my office. Nate and I were talking in our podcast about, when I do that, or when Amy makes a quilt, or when someone writes a poem or a song, it's an expression of whatever is good and wondrous within them that they want to share, right? And I can't help but feel if we're made in God's image, that's got to be true of God as well.
Yeah, one time I heard some, I think it was, I was at some conference, it was a woman speaking, and she was kind of trying to recreate creation.
Yeah.
Or, you know what I mean, when
Good
God,
luck.
yeah, exactly, when God, so, take it at that. But, so when God was getting ready to blow into Adam the breath of life, that he turned to Jesus and said, are you ready to do this? And that always stuck with me, like, there had to be that thought, because he said he was crucified from the foundations of the world.
Yeah.
There was that choice.
Any other thoughts, or? Thank you. So we're going to talk about these attributes of God that he, in his grace, shares with us who are made in his image. And these are obviously going to be things that are not perfect in us, and they're not there to the same degree. But what are some of the attributes of God that we can share?
Faithfulness.
All right. Yeah. So-
Forgiveness.
All right, great. What else?
Mercy.
Love.
Mercy. What else?
Creativity.
Creativity. What else? What are some other attributes of God?
Hope.
Hope? No, I've never heard that as an attribute of God. I'll have to think on that.
Community.
Community, yeah. What about wisdom?
Yes.
Reason.
Grace.
Grace.
Truth.
Righteousness.
Joy.
All right, just one or two more because I'm running out of room here. What are the attributes of God?
Glory.
Glory?
Got some fruit of the Spirit.
Okay, yeah. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness. And if you pick up a book on the attributes of God, you'll find a chapter on the mercy of God and the love of God and probably the faithfulness of God. Wisdom of God. Oh wait, we wrote that down. Never mind. So, and And they're very often they'll have this love and creativity as part of this. Now, I was thinking about this, and I like this list, and obviously there's no perfect way of doing this, and these are all going to kind of blend into each other. But one thing, I feel like I would go like this though. I almost feel like when God interacts with us, that there's one main attribute, just like kind of God's transcendence is kind of the main idea here, and that's how we understand what these mean. When he interacts with us, this is the controlling attribute. And maybe it doesn't work for all of them, but God's faithful to us because of his love. And God forgives us and is merciful to us. And he gives us hope and grace and truth and so many other things because of this. So maybe that doesn't work, but I feel like it's almost the face of God that is turned towards humanity or his creation is wrapped up in this word of love. So if this is who he is in its essence, in relationship to us, that's to me the all-encompassing category. Now, I could be wrong, maybe that's not the right way to think of it exactly, but we'll get started. Let's look at a passage, John 17. Someone want to read verse 20 through 26. You're checking the kids?
Yeah, really,
Okay. All right. John 17, 20 through 26. Who's going to read that nice and loud and clear?
I can.
Thank you.
What verse to start on?
20, please.
And end with?
26.
Okay.
And of course, the context is this is part of the farewell discourse and final prayer of Jesus, right before he goes to the cross. So first he prays for himself in the first five verses, and then he prays for the 12 disciples, or 11 at this point, and then those who will hear the message through them, it'd be us. So go ahead.
My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one, I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am, and to see my glory, the glory you have given me because you loved me before the creation of the world. Righteous Father, though the world does not know you, I know you, and I know that you have sent me. I have made you known to them, and will continue to make you known in order that the love you have for me may be in them, and that I myself may be in them.
I always think of Batushka dolls when I read this passage. Because Nancy talks about, like in verse 23, I in them and you in me. And then later on, like the last verse, I myself may be in them and that they may be in me. So it's like, I don't know if there's a way to illustrate this or not. It's like, here's Jesus, and Jesus is in God, and God is in Jesus, and then somehow we're in there as well. I mean, that's what he says, right? He says, just as you are in me and I am in you, verse 21, may they also be in us. So this is the heart of it. Again, we talked about this before, is this union with God. The heart of God's love and God's purpose is not to make us followers ultimately, but to make us united with himself. And he goes on, verse 23, I in them, and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. You want to read that again? Wait. God the Father loves us even as he loves Jesus. Now let's think about this. One of the things we talked about last week was if God is infinite in all he does, because there are no limits, there are no boundaries to what he does, there's no partiality. If everything he does is infinite and perfect, then what is his love for you? Infinite and perfect. I wrote this down on the paper here. We are now loved by God with the same love that he has for his son Jesus. That is an amazing, amazing statement. But I don't see how you can read this passage and not get that, right? That you have loved them as you have loved me. And then the last verse. In order that the love you have for me may be in them, and that I myself may be in them. So it's not this lesser love, not the love you have for me, but it's still a good love. I mean, it's still a great thing. I mean, it's love. It's from God, right? No, the love you have for me may be in them. That is something I cannot get my mind around. There's a foundational love before the creation of the world, more enduring than the stars and the mountains. The love of the perfect God for the perfect Son and Spirit. And that love has now been placed upon you so that you are brought into union with God. That's amazing. Okay, we'll over one. What are your thoughts? Yeah, Nathan?
Well, I just had the thought while you were saying that, like, the love that God has for us, if it's the same love he has for Jesus, then is not conditional based on what we do or don't do.
Yeah.
And that's really neat. It also like pursues us. I mean, thinking about like the parable with the two brothers. Well, I'm like
The prodigal son, maybe?
yes.
Okay.
That's, yeah. Well, just thinking about the love and that the Father has for, it's just like outlooking for us, waiting for us, like it's initiative taking. There's a fullness to it that's not conditional, I guess.
Yeah.
How does this jive with those that will not participate in the law? So there are beings, humans and angels, that won't participate in that law.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm glad you brought that out. The best way I can understand it is that God's love is perfect in its fullness and intention. And as part of that, then, it has to be, it's not something that can be forced, but only offered.
Yeah.
So, if I come up and I say to Dave and Kay, and I say to Becky, you know, I had this great plan for you guys, and it'll really incredibly bless you. And we're gonna have to go on a trip, and so you'll have to trust me a little bit, you know, give me 2 days of your time to go see this wonderful idea that you're just gonna love. Now, I extended the same loving and offer to all three of them. The same, maybe 2 of them take me up on it, and Becky doesn't, because she doesn't trust me. That's what happens when you sit in the front row, sorry. It's not that my love for her is less complete than my love for them, but certainly the way it will be experienced will be different, because God does honor our choice in that. So that's kind of the best analogy I can think of.
Is the story of the prodigal son, I'm asking like elementary questions. I
That's all right.
realize.
That's all right, it's okay.
Is it about us returning to the Father or going to the Father?
Yes, in a sense. So Jesus was giving a parable because, especially the religious people among the Jews, the common people were often coming to him, but the more religious were not, especially the temple elite and those who had power. And so he gives this parable because ultimately the prodigal son's going to represent the Gentiles and those who come back to God through Christ. Whereas the older brother is going to represent the Jewish establishment who doesn't like the brother coming back, who resents it because they feel like they've already been following God. And that's why Jesus doesn't tell us what the older brother does. You know, he tells us the appeal. You know, everything I have is yours. But he doesn't tell us his response because it's an open question to them. It's like, are you going to be the older brother who says, you're right, I'm going to go in and party? Or are you going to turn your back? So, does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, and then what it answers in me is the prodigal son was always the son.
Yeah, he had the same opportunities.
Right, but he didn't recognize his full sonship until he returned back to the Father. I'm going along, no, I'm sorry, I haven't met you yet. I think it's the question here that God so loved the world, he loved the whole world, Jesus died for the whole world, and yet everyone is not gonna make it to heaven. So it is our response to his gift.
Yeah.
Just like the son had to respond, he had to make a decision to go back to the Father. This is so elementary, but,
No, it's fine. We need to be reminded.
you know. I think I'm troubled by terms like the elect and things like that, and the idea that it's people are predestined, and I know these are biblical terms, but I'm troubled by those, but I do have to believe that everyone has the same opportunity.
Well, isn't when you go to end times, isn't that where you get the sheep and the goats and that point? The people who are not in Christ, or people who before Christ came to the world, will find their judgment there.
Yes.
So, you know, it's not that they're not, it's just that there's a different method for them than it is for those who know Christ and.
I'm lost. That's what I'm a little lost on what you're saying there, Dave.
That's all right.
Well, and then when God has offered this love to us unconditionally, those who don't accept that, I would believe would be hurtful to him. I mean, just like you love your children and one of them doesn't reciprocate or whatever, how hurtful is that? So, what is Jesus?
I think probably
What
he
does
is
God
hurt by
do?
that, but he's not spiteful about it.
Right, just because it's hurtful doesn't mean you quit loving your children. I think that's the way God is. Just because we do something that hurts him doesn't mean he quits loving us.
Right.
That's the perfectness of him. I get so excited because it's just it's amazing to me
It is.
that, you know, the one, and I don't know what the verse is, but the one thing when I was a kid, one of the things that stood out to me is he knew every hair on your head. And that just got me. It still does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's getting easier for some of us. But yeah, it's true. He's seen every, I saw this somewhere. It's very comforting to know that God's already taken my future stupidity into account. The eternity of God. There's another passage I want to look at here. Unless we have time though, if someone wants any more about John 17. Yeah, Kathy?
I have a comment
Yeah.
about, God loving us like Jesus, etc. I was reading about the Garden of Gethsemane, and how it always kind of bothered me why Christ said, "Oh, can this cup pass from me?"
Yeah.
Didn't understand it. It's like, was he afraid? Blah blah blah. Well, I read this commentary, and he said, "Well, what was the cup? The cup was the cup of God's wrath on sin." And he said, so what was really going on there was, can this pass from me? I don't want to be separated from you.
Right.
And And so Jesus chose to be separated from, this is mind-boggling, from God the Father. And God the Father chose to be separated from Jesus for us, for me, for me.
That is my mind.
That's unbelievable, the kind of love that took.
More than we'll know.
But he wasn't afraid.
No.
He just didn't want to be afraid, separated from his Father.
Yeah. All right, 1 John 3, 1 through 3. Who's going to read this one for us?
I will.
Thank you.
See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God, and that is what we are. The reason the world does not know us is that it did not know Him. Dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. But we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is. All who have this hope in Him purify themselves just as He is pure.
I love this passage. I mean, you can see the emotion. See what great love the Father has lavished upon us. You know, like that woman who just lavished the expensive ointment on the feet of Jesus. That we should be called the children of God. So he doesn't say, see what great love the Father has lavished on us, that our life will be really good right now. Our problems will be taken away. We will have just the kind of life we want right now. That is not what he says. And if you look at those who are beloved by God in the scriptures, that wasn't their experience for the most part. The gospel, the love of God, is that you are his child. There is a union that he desires with you. And that's at the heart of it. And he will allow us pain in this world, overseeing that for our eternal good. And maybe there is there are no degrees of love from God. I wonder sometimes if there are degrees of union we'll be able to have with God because of the choices we have made here. Maybe that's terribly wrong, but there are rewards of some kind. So maybe it's just those rewards are greater opportunities in the new heaven and new earth to do things we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. Just like the reward of someone going through medical school is now they can practice medicine, or the reward of someone who spends years learning an instrument is that they can play music. So maybe that's what it is. Anyway, but this is the love, that we have this eternal union with God. And then he says, I like this part. What we will be, we don't know, because we haven't seen it yet. So try explaining to a caterpillar how much better their life as a butterfly will be, you know. You'll be able to fly. Let's fly, you know. You know, float in the air. What's air? So, a caterpillar is going to think in caterpillar terms and values. And it's not until that metamorphosis that they would even understand what a butterfly kind of existence would be like. So maybe that has something to do with some analogy here. We don't yet know what we will be. One thing we know, he says, we will be like him because we will see him as he is. So that's the promise. Union, likeness, and seeing God. And Everly is not happy. Poor Everly. Thoughts on that?
It's hard to think about, you know, like, God high and lifted up on the throne, well, then do you see the Holy Spirit who is Jesus, you know, my brain starts to just,
Yeah.
I just don't think you can know what it's gonna be like.
Yeah.
I mean, at the same time, he does tell us a lot of things that, you know, obviously there's a feast in heaven, there's gonna be food, there's different scriptures that talk about different animals, obviously Christ coming back on a horse, blah, blah, blah. You know, so it's like, you can kind of get a little bit of a glimpse,
Yeah.
but this whole thing about God and seeing him, I don't know what that would be like.
Yeah. And I don't know what that is either. My best understanding is that with our eyes, we will never see the Father because he does not have a body, but Jesus does. And maybe in that new reality where we are not limited by things the way we are now, we will able to see Christ, each one of us, physically.
We can get our mind around that.
Yeah.
Do you think it was Christ who was sitting on the throne in Isaiah?
Yeah, I think it probably was. I'm not sure about that, but that seems to be that even from the beginning, God has placed all authority in this universe under Christ. Anyway, if you look down here a little bit at chapter 4 of 1 John, actually go to 3:16. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay our lives down for our brothers and sisters. And then in chapter 4, dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. And this is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his only Son to be an atoning sacrifice for our sin. You can come in if you want. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
No problem. And the reason I wanted to bring this verse out is because it reminds us of what love is. If you ask me for a definition of love, I would say it's giving of oneself for the ultimate good of the other person. Is there a feeling in that? Usually, yeah, but that's not the heart of it. You can love someone in that way even if you have negative feelings towards them at the moment, right? You can't always control your emotions. You can to some degree, but not always, and not completely.
That's your will.
Yeah. And that's what love is, he says. That God gave, God sent. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son for our ultimate good. That's what's involved there. All right, I want to look at one other passage, and then we'll turn to some worship. But any thoughts or questions about that one? She okay?
Yeah,
Just
Peter
wanted to-
and Everly were playing off of each other.
All right. So, last passage we'll look at today, Ephesians chapter 3. And we'll start in verse 14 through 19. Now, just as a reminder, Ephesians is like Romans. And some of the others epistles are like this, but not quite as clear cut. The first part is all about what God has done for us through the cross and God's plan. So in Romans, it's all the way up through chapter 1 through 11, and then chapter 12 through 16, how we are supposed to respond to that. In Ephesians, it's first 3 chapters of what God is doing and what he's done for you, and the last 3 are how you respond. So here it comes after 3 chapters of just talking about God's wonderful plan and how we fit in. And the others is prayer for them. Now he's praying for believers, as he makes clear. But this is what he prays. So someone want to read that? Ephesians 3, 14 through 19.
Sure.
Thank you, David.
For this reason I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and how long and how high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God.
All right. It says you've been rooted and established in love. He's writing to believers. But at the same time, he says, but I'm praying that you have power. Interesting, he says power instead of knowledge or wisdom, to grasp this love of Christ. And he resorts to paradox, or to spatial dimensions. How wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and then he resorts to paradox. And to know this love that surpasses knowledge. Yeah? So you're never going to get to the end of it. You're never going to, in your whole lifetime, know everything there is to know about the Pacific Ocean. But you can still go there and swim in it. You can still watch a documentary. You can still learn more about it and experience it. And enjoy the fact that you'll never exhaust the depths of what this is. It says in the same way, as believers, it's interesting that one thing he prays for us, it seems like the most important thing, is that we would have power to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is this love, and to know this love that goes beyond knowledge. He prays that, apparently more importantly than anything else he could think of right here, before he goes into all the passages about what we do in response. And I guess it's because our obedience from our heart to Christ is only going to be real and growing to the extent that we are growing in our knowledge of his love for us. This inner righteousness, not just the external thing, but this heart righteousness is going to come as we understand more how deeply we are loved. Does that make sense? What are your thoughts or questions about that?
Well, I think the more you learn and begin to grasp as much as we can and how much he loves us, it makes us love him more and makes me, I'll just speak, me, want to live, not disappoint,
Yeah.
Try to honor him and glorify him to the ability that I can.
This is not just an intellectual knowledge
No?
at all. So it's more than just knowing intellectually. It takes experience, life's experience, and to really understand this better, not really understand.
Yes, definitely. There seems to be an element of, I don't know if it's an element of choice, but I think we can short circuit the process by not trusting. And that is a choice.
Back to the idea of him praying for power, back in verse 16. I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being. What is the definition of the inner being?
Well,
Is it resilience?
no, it's more kind of what we would call the heart, I think. Someone lost their remote for this, so I've got to do this eventually. Yeah, I'm not sure, sorry, I'm distracted a little bit too, but intervene would be something like we would call the heart or the soul, but not exactly that. So, Nathan, you got something?
Yeah, I was just kind of curious, your thoughts, like was just said, it's not really just an intellectual thing, so how do we, what's the process for moving that from the head to the heart?
Well, it's not just an intellectual thing, but intellectual is part of it. So part of it is meditating upon what he reveals in his word. And then it's community, worship, reminding each other of that, upholding each other in that, praying for each other, like Paul does. I mean, how many times do we pray, God, would you help me to understand your love more fully? But that's what Paul's doing. You know, he's told them about God's love, but now it's in, I have to pray for that you understand it. You know, do we pray for our other people, our children? God, help them to understand your love, because they're wrestling with the sin or this choice, and help them to put that perspective of your love. Or me, you know, I'm battling with this temptation. Help me to see your love in this, so I don't give in to that. So I think that's a lot of it. It's a good question.
It's not a formula either, I mean, each one of us is going
Right,
through kind of
yeah.
that realization on our own and in our own way.
Yes, that's a good point. And I will say one final word. We talked about a choice a little bit and short-circuiting the process. I don't think I wrote this down, but I meant to. I think in the end, as believers who go through difficulties in this life, like we will, the choice becomes, are we going to interpret circumstances in light of God's love, or vice versa? Are we going to say, this is so painful that I don't feel God really loves me, or he would solve this problem? So one of those two, in the end, is going to win out. And we have a choice to do that.